start, I think you can hear me, right? Ed, maybe you can comment on the situation with the cash grants. What is your expectation? How will that influence installed capacity installations in the market?
Everyone understands the 1603 program is pretty vital to the utility scale market. And as we see in the United States, the utility scale market is quite large, and we have large expectations for the future of that. What we've noticed is that as the end of the year approaches, that there are many customers who are trying to get grandfathered into the 1603 grants, and it's going to play a critical impact on the large scale utility projects that we're seeing. I had some discussions with SEIA the other day, and out of Washington D.C. they're looking forward to it being renewed. They think it's very promising that the grants will be renewed, and we hope that that's the case as well for the industry, because it's definitely going to affect the utility scale development projects that we're seeing.
Chad, you're I think one of the biggest and most famous companies, solar companies located in Texas. So maybe you can comment or give us some insights in what is going on here in the different segments in the PV industry. What is your view on that?
In the Texas market, the PV industry in general? You know, what I would say is Texas is going to be one of the largest markets in the United States. I'm sure of that. I would suggest by maybe 2015 that Texas will be one of the top 3 states and retain that position forever. It just makes so much sense. We're an energy state. We're a great big state. We consume and produce more energy, more electricity than any other state. It's air conditioning. It's this summer, you know, it's the hottest summer on record. But beyond that, we're an industrial state. We use a lot of natural gas. We use a lot of electricity. It's going to happen here in Texas. My hope is that the distributed scale, the market will develop. The utility market, we looked at some slides earlier. Most of that you see is happening in San Antonio and Austin, happening out of those markets where they have their own renewable portfolio standard, and they're taking some steps to meet those goals. But nothing much is happening in the investor-owned markets here in Texas. I don't have time to go into it, but the utility markets in Texas are a mess. We deregulated our utilities 10 years ago. As I like to say it, we separated the generation bone from the T&D bone from the retail bone, and it's really not working out too well. The investor-owned utility markets in Houston and the Dallas area and parts of El Paso and a little bit up in the Panhandle and down in Beaumont comprise about 80% of the market. And in those markets where we leave it up to the investor-owned utilities to create incentives for solar, we have none. And that's not so good. The incentives and rebates that you're looking at have largely come from the municipally owned markets in Austin and San Antonio. Those utilities are owned by the cities themselves. They set their own renewable portfolio standards. They control it. In Dallas, our utility, our incumbent utility, is owned by a private equity company, and they put $46 billion in debt on it. They're fighting to stay alive, and rebates for local solar programs are far from their line. They have done some good things. I want to give Encore credit. When the private equity company bought them, and I need to cut it short, they set aside $100 million, and part of that they put into some rebate programs. But it's not a large priority. I think the markets in Texas are just too big to ignore. It's going to happen. We have an 80% population concentration in Dallas, San Antonio, Houston. These are good markets. We've got a lot of buildings. We've got a lot of opportunity for distributed generation. And all of West Texas is left for Ed and his utility scale projects. But I think the markets are good. It's a slow start, but we're gonna get there, and Texas will be a leading market.
Thank you. Nick, I just read some news that you succeeded in another 20 megawatt success utility scale. So please let us know what are the success factors to doing with business with the utilities from your point of view.
So I'm just hearing about problems in Texas being that you have utilities that are difficult to work with. They're not interested in creating rebates for solar. They don't have legislative or regulatory mandates. And certainly in California, we just won actually 30 megawatts of projects with PG&E and through their utility-owned generation program. And I think the key to the success for Qcells, but just generally in these kinds of programs, is you align incentives of the utility and of the solar industry. So in this instance, PG&E is able to realize a return on investment for these projects. And so they are going to finance the construction of the project, and they're going to own the asset, and they get a return on investment of, if they have a return on equity of 11%. So they're going to make 11% on this solar project. And so from their shareholders' perspective, these solar projects make a lot of sense. It's not, hey, the PUC or the regulators, the legislature are telling us you have to go and buy renewables and you have to increase the cost of power to your consumers and all this sort of messaging stuff. No, this is a solid investment opportunity for your utility, and we are going to allow you to get that return that's good for the investor. So I think that is really one of the really important things that our industry needs to get a little bit more real about, particularly in places like Texas, where we have very strong utilities, but really all over the country, is how do we align the interests of us, the solar industry, and the utilities. So from Qcells' perspective, specifically for these projects, one of the key success factors for us is that we've brought in a team of people who come from the traditional power industry. And these are people who have a long track record of selling fossil generation and distribution systems to utilities. So they have a really strong understanding of what do utilities look for when they're buying product. The other thing that Qcells brought, and this is very important to utilities, is quality. So we may not have been the very lowest bidder. I can say that we had a very low bid, and it's a very economical project, but we're not the bottom of the barrel. But we can say, look, we have 350 megawatts under management. We've built 350 megawatts. We're a global company. You know that this project is going to be there for 20 years, producing what we say it's going to produce. And I think that that's another piece for utilities, is that they're used to working with big companies who can stand behind the projects that are built for them. And they look at solar and think, well, it's all these little companies, and there's 50 different module companies that I've never heard of, and they're going to go out of business next year. So to be successful in utility business, not utility scale per se yet, but utility business, you have to be utility grade. And utility grade is you have to be big, you have to align your incentives with them, and you have to really think about what they need.
Thanks. Helen, Bosch has one of the strongest brands in the States. You're advertising about and you built your brand for decades. I'm wondering, how do you see the development of the channels of the systems, and from your perspective, what must be done, and what are the success factors for BP in Texas, but maybe also in other states?
Sure. I think to reflect on what previous panelists and Chet in particular brought up, I think one of the most important drivers for a successful solar PV state, first of all, is having very transparent and organized and consolidated kind of efforts from the utilities, and to have some sort of statewide programs. Currently, the fragmentation of all the municipal utilities and on-again, off-again programs make it extremely difficult for installers to plan, distributors, manufacturers, So having some long-term goals, I think, not only in the state of Texas, I mean, you see this in other states around the country, are extremely critical. I think having some level of advocacy early on as Texas develops will be important for the state to get the mind share in collaboration with utilities. As Nick rightly pointed out, I think making sure that the utilities have shared interests with the industry will also be important to make sure that they are working partners. Of course, the net metering issue that I think Daniela touched on is that if the utilities won't interconnect you, it's going to be very challenging for you to turn on your PV array. So with all of the work that you all want to do in growing the market, I think having that kind of infrastructure and cooperation from your key partners will be very important. So I think, you know, and also looking at the market in Texas, very interestingly, we were speaking to CPS. If you looked at some of the slides that Daniela showed with the huge growth in the utility sector, I think overall having more of a balance in the long run with more residential programs and commercial will help strengthen the whole market so that you're not completely at the realm of, you know, at the mercy of a 400 megawatt project by CPS. I mean, that would, if that happens, it would be huge for Texas, but it's also one very large project that they intend to give to one developer. What was also interesting about that RFP is that they were looking for local manufacturing of PV modules in the CPS territory. So this is also another challenge that some manufacturers face. Many states, of course, jobs are a huge issue at the moment. So if you can create factories or plants that can take advantage of the utility programs, we see this as becoming a request that comes up often now. But I think from a manufacturer's standpoint, you need to have enough security in those types of programs if you're going to do some local manufacturing.
When I look at the pipelines, the PV pipeline, sometimes hard to evaluate, but it counts or sums up to more than 10 gigawatt. And then I see another pipeline of CSP, also summing up to 10 gigawatts. Maybe someone from the panelists may comment on that. What is the feedback from the utilities that have also focused CSP? Is it possible to convert that? Even if I look at the Solar Millennium press releases that they are now going to write solar farm for PV. Can we add that CSP pipeline because levelized cost of energy-wise, I think PV is now cheaper than CSP. Not just regarding CapEx, also regarding OpEx. So someone may comment on that. Is there some experience?
Just my experience with these projects is limited to California. And I've worked for a CSP company, I've worked for a regulatory agency who looks at these contracts. And I think that particularly in the absence of an extension of the loan guarantee program, many CSP projects, even the ones that are still, you know, that have PPAs and what they have, are going to have a very difficult time moving forward. It's not a proven technology. It doesn't have the infrastructure to bring costs down like PV does. PV is a global supply chain that's driven by global market. CSP is really limited to the Southwest and southern Spain and maybe North Africa. So I think that 10 gigawatts of CSP is bragawatts, not real megawatts. And you're not going to see many. I think you're still going to see projects that are even under construction make the switch. I think you're going to see very, very, very few CSP megawatts actually get built. You know, the market fundamentals are there. We see where module prices have gotten in the last year, and they're still going down. It's fairly obvious to me, but I work for a PV company.
I mean, just to touch on that, there have been articles about CSP projects having PV modules swapped in. So this, if you just read any of the major magazines, and it's simply because the cost of PV has fallen. I think investors also have a greater reliability.
And then, you know, your neighbor puts up solar and tells you, well, I got 250 watt. Well, I'm going to wait a year before I install mine. We need consistent incentives or no incentives at all. And really, with the reduced price of solar, I think that's what I'm ready for. I don't think we need it. It's very hard to compete with lignite coal at 8 cents a kilowatt hour. I said earlier, in this industry, we don't price nor do we pay for the environmental cost of energy consumption and production. That's a huge problem, but that won't change. It seems to me that what we need, what we could have, is just simply an inviting regulatory environment. Kindness at the bully pulpit rather than the kind of attitude that we've shown in Texas. One of the things that's keeping energy prices down in Texas, and maybe all over the country, is fracking in these shale sands. The price of natural gas is falling tremendously over the last 4 years, and there's no expectation that it'll go up. So we're going to live in a cheap energy environment. Our governor's in Las Vegas today. Instead of a welcoming address, thank you, at our convention yesterday, he's in Las Vegas, drill now, drill here, drill often, and environmental deregulation. But you know what? It's not going to work. And I would say that there's still a huge green market here in Texas and all over the United States. And now that solar is more approachable and more affordable, I think you'll see a lot of people jumping in. One of the things we're trying to do, and then I'll yield quickly, is we're trying to pre-package some systems. We're trying to make it easy. Even smaller scale systems. It doesn't have to be 5.7 kilowatts. Maybe you don't have that much room on your house. But we can ship you 12 panels, we can ship you 6 panels, and we can do it at a cost of a very, very low cost, approaching $3 a watt. Now, why it goes to $6.42, I really don't know. But we need a uniform, standardized regulatory environment. And one of the things I would say generally is this is not the PV industry's fault. We don't need to take it on as our fault. It's a regulatory issue. It's a political issue. We've done a tremendous job of bringing the price down. And if we lose $1 or $2 a watt in building permits and interconnect fees and whatever, we ought to really raise some hell with our legislatures, because that's a political issue. It's a regulatory issue. As an industry, we've done a terrific job of bringing the cost down.
So is there any other take on that? How do we get there? I think it's a very valid point. The payoff, 5 years. How do we get there, and when will we get there?
I'm not sure I can add to that significantly, but I would like to touch the regulatory, because although I do agree with Jet, there's something missing from that answer from my perspective. And I'd like to share it with this group because it's a significant level of hope. Most recently, when I attended the UL 1741 standard development programs, there were 17 new members. One of the gentlemen commented there that they've lost by end-of-life experiences 5 or 7 members, and so there's this new wave of young, enthusiastic power electronics representatives that are working with these regulatory issues. That's not political. It's not influenced by elections, and those standards are a great mechanism to lower costs, and it's going to take a little time, but it is changing, and there is hope. And people like me are on that panel, and I don't think there's anyone else my age on that panel 3 years ago. So just put that in perspective. It is regulatory, it is compliance, it is non-political.
To the cost issue, the fact that 8.5 cent power is what we have to compete against. So, one interesting opportunity for a place like Texas is to pursue the kind of regulatory reforms. Maybe you don't even need regulatory reforms to enable something like community solar. So you essentially take advantage of wholesale price of power. So you build 20 megawatts or something. So, and right now in California, we're seeing you can realistically build a 20, 30, 40 megawatt facility for a levelized cost of energy of say 10.5 cents, 11 cents. So similar insulation in parts of South Texas, West Texas, cheap land, access to the grid. You're talking about giving people the ability to own a share of solar facility where they're essentially buying their power, they're being credited at 9 or 10 cents. Well, there are still folks in Texas who would make that, say, I'll pay an extra cent to be solar powered. I think these are the kinds of things you need to think about to really engage in states where you don't have the willingness to have a $2 or $3 incentive. We don't need an incentive, so I think we need to get beyond that. On the PG&E point, it's just, go talk to Reliant or Encore, these folks, and try to, what's the business case for them to own solar, to participate in solar, and present it as a business case, not as an environmental benefit. It's a business case. If the business case works, there will be interest.
Is that an answer you'd like to hear? Can you do something with it, or do you want to fire something else to the panel?
Well, okay.
Okay. First, I agree with you, Nick. Incentives they need to be a thing of the past. Regulatory reform, when we talk
regulatory reform, when we talk about environmental, yes, because then that does start to levelize things. When you do have to pay for what we are doing to the environment through fossil fuels and other fracking, etc., all of those things, that puts us back in perspective. The PG&E thing, it may work for other places. It doesn't work for Texas because, like Chet said, we're all screwed up here. I mean, we have ERCOT, but because we've deregulated, and a couple other states have deregulated also, it throws that whole thing in the mix. It throws it all out of whack. So
let me just throw out an interesting thing that I've seen recently. So you have Constellation Energy, which is a retail supplier in a state like Maryland. Mm-hmm. They actually have bought a residential lease company. So they're providing through their energy services subsidiary solar leases. So it's a value-add service. They're like, we want to keep you as our customer. We don't want you to go to one of these other retail suppliers, and so we'll actually lease you a PV system. So they're making money because they're leasing the system and they're providing service to their customers. So I think, again, it's how do you get utilities interested?
Well, you're on the money because I was just having a conversation with someone here about community solar, the exact words. And the solar leases, TXU with Solar City here in Texas, they kind of do that too. You sign a long-term agreement with one particular retail energy provider, and then you get a percentage off of the program and or the actual system. I guess really it's we talk too high level. Somebody asked me at the beginning of this, are you getting this? Is this too cerebral? And guess what? It isn't for me, but it is for John Q. Public, and that's the thing. All of our organizations are focused on regulatory reform almost exclusively. It's about changing the political view and aspect, and it's not about educating the end user. Now, the end user, it might be PG&E, it might be the utility company, it might be the customer, it might be the small-scale commercial installation. We're actually in small markets. We are in Texas at $6.25, like Abilene. Down in CPS land, where they have their own incentive, they're anywhere from $4.75 to $3.85, all the way up to $5. Here in Dallas, we just had to quote something at $3, and that's without an incentive. And somehow try to be able to make a profit at it. And that's because there is no incentive, and that's because the incentive comes and goes. I would rather not have an incentive and be able to tell someone that, hey, we are quality, just like you're saying about Bosch. We are quality. But instead, you got to put in whatever you can put in at the risk of hurting the entire industry. Really, our goal should be, since we're talking about changing from kilowatt DC cost installed to changing into what the electricity industry is, which is kilowatt hour cost, we should be talking about not a product, not a price, but a return on investment. And that's what I really think it is. Whether it's years or environment or however you want to broach it, but it's return on investment. That's what the utility scale wants. That's what John Q. Public wants to do.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
This will be the last question. We are all running out
Oh,
of
okay.
meetings. So thank you very much.
Yes, my question, well, first of all, Chet, appreciate your outlook for Texas. Glad to hear it's going to be one of the leaders, and you have a lot of confidence in Rick Perry, or more than I have, but I was just curious about, of course, rebates and so forth, but peak pricing, peak load pricing, from my viewpoint, because of the way that the solar marries in with that, to offset the most expensive electricity that people are purchasing, even at 8 cent, 8.7, maybe that's the midnight price, but if we had a 3 o'clock in the afternoon price significantly higher, and do you see that, that type of electricity pricing in Texas becoming normal? And then the other part of the question is just, the offering of, or assistance from the manufacturers, distribution, et cetera, with leasing and financing vehicles, to where, we have something more to offer our customers than what we're able to get on our own, if there's something that can be put together on a larger scale. Thanks.
Check, I take a stab at that real quick just before you go after it. I just want to, if we remember those who were in the industry, Southern California Edison did their time of use model, and it collapsed the residential market for 6 to 8 months. So they put in a demand where if you were going to sign a net metering agreement, you would have to move to a time of use model. We're talking a lot about education of general public. Most people don't understand in North America, from my perspective, when they use electricity and peak demand type charges. And so you had people who had no time of use model, and they simply had a consumption-based or tiered rate model. They would put a solar system in with an expected IRR or payback, and they would be forced to move over to a time of use. And there was significant threats around legal action, and it collapsed the entire market. So while I agree with you fundamentally, I think it asks, certainly on the residential scale, it puts a couple dams up for an image, and swimming upstream might be too much of a barrier in the beginning. Theoretically, on a larger scale, I agree with you, but I wanted to say, history always repeats itself. The best, indicator in the future is the past. I would counsel against that on the residential side because of that experience in California.
And I'll certainly yield to the empirical experience. It does make a lot of sense that tiered pricing, time of use pricing makes so much sense for the solar industry. Here in Texas, we've deregulated our utilities in the larger markets. We have over 100, we call them REPs, retail electric providers. That's where you buy your electricity from. We've separated generation from T&D, from retail, and it's really up to these guys to come up with these kind of pricing schemes. The PUC has talked about it. They've been very, very unaccommodating, not very aggressive at all in promoting these kind of pricing schemes. I've read that Reliant in Houston and TXU both are looking at these kinds of things, but I don't think they've implemented them in the market. On a commercial level, there are pricing schemes where industries would agree to brown out during certain times of year for cheaper power, and of course that would work well with solar as well. In terms of financing, Brent, I think that's a big opportunity in the industry, and I think over at SPI today you'll see some companies that specialize in bringing finance to the PV and even distributed scale industry, not the leasing schemes, but even project finance for small commercial and perhaps residential. It's a huge opportunity. It's where the utilities could make a lot of money if they wanted to get in it, and they should be in it because distributed generation is so grid friendly. And the grid was in the news this summer, believe me, threatening rolling blackouts nearly every day during August.
Thank you very much. So I will not do a huge summary. This was such an interesting discussion, and I'm sure we could continue that for another hour. But I know you're busy, and we all want to go to the show and have discussions with the customers, with the market, and to drive our businesses forward. Thank you very much, Ed, Chad, Nick, Helen, David, and Marius for being here. It was very fruitful, and I think there is quite a good outlook. But I think as well, when it comes to the point of education, when it comes to the point of showing the values to the end customers, when we may be facing cash grants in the future, Of course, we must bring system prices down and show the utilities the profitability, how they can money with that business. I can just tell you, in the European markets, education-wise or awareness-wise, we're a little bit ahead, and there's much more willingness to pay for green power. And I'm quite sure that almost 50% of the Americans share that view. So it's a question of reaching them, and it really is a question of supporting the sales channels, contractors and the installers that are really looking from. Thank you very much, gentlemen, and I wish you a successful show. See you back at our next show here in the United States. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.